A few years back, when I was in my mid-30s and going through a rather bleak chapter in my life, something unsettling happened. I had recently ended a long-term relationship. 5 years with someone I had genuinely imagined building a life with, someone I thought would be my wife and the mother of my future children. Needless to say, I was in a bad place. The emotional fallout was intense, and for weeks I found myself spiraling, neglecting basic self-care, isolating from everyone. My days were a blur. I'd wake up, barely speak to a soul at work, come home, and retreat into bed until the next day. Weekends were even darker. I'd skip meals, avoid the outside world entirely, and numb my mind with back-to-back films I wasn't even really watching. But I've healed a lot since then, though I occasionally still wonder what life might have been like if things hadn't fallen apart. One Saturday night during that period, I was slouched on the couch in my bedroom, which also doubles as my entertainment space, and I barely moved other than to tap play on whatever movie popped up. I couldn't tell you the title. It was some forgettable action flick that blurred into all the others. Around 9 p.m., I noticed a call from my mom, the fourth one that day. I didn't ignore her out of malice. I just didn't have the energy to deal with her concerned check-ins. After zoning out to that film for a bit, I backed out to the menu and randomly selected a horror movie with a grainy thumbnail I didn't recognize. It looked generic, and I figured I'd half watch it until I passed out. About 20 minutes in, I realized it was worse than expected. The dialogue was barely audible, forcing me to constantly adjust the volume, only to be hit with deafening sound effects moments later. Still, I let it play, probably because I didn't feel like searching for something else. Then something strange caught my attention. A recurring clanging noise, like metal hitting concrete. It didn't line up with anything in the film. No pipes, no factory setting, no relevant scene. It wasn't part of a jump scare either. It just kept popping up at regular intervals. Same tone, same intensity, like an editing mistake. The movie's awful sound mixing only made it more jarring. Yet somehow I couldn't stop watching, half entertained by how terrible it was. Around the halfway point, I got up to use the bathroom, and for some reason, I paused the movie. When I returned and hovered over the play button, I heard it again, that same sharp metallic clang. But the movie was paused. I froze. The sound was unmistakably clear and definitely came from inside the house. That's when it hit me. It was never part of the film. I stayed perfectly still, hoping I'd imagined it. But then, less than a minute later, I heard it again. Same sound. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed a knife from my desk and began searching every room, heart pounding. Nothing. No intruder, no mess, not even a thing out of place. On my way back upstairs, I heard it again, though quieter this time, as if it had come from my own bedroom. That didn't make sense. I'd been there all along. Then I remembered. I had a couple of windows cracked open. It was spring, and I'd started letting in some evening air lately. A disturbing realization crept in. What if the sound wasn't coming from inside, but just outside? That thought somehow made it worse. I carefully approached the window and peeked through the curtain. In the middle of my yard, about 20 feet out, a single patio chair had been dragged away from the deck. Standing next to it was a child, small, definitely not a teenager or adult. I couldn't make out any features due to the darkness, but his silhouette was unmistakably that of a young boy. In his hand was something like a PVC pipe, which explained the noise. As soon as he saw me looking, he hit the chair with it again, making that same harsh metallic clang. I instantly stepped away from the window, gripped by an unfamiliar fear. I know how ridiculous it sounds, being scared of a child, but something about the situation felt deeply off. Was he lost? Did he have a mental illness? But what unsettled me more was the realization that he'd probably been out there for nearly an hour. I tried to calm myself and think rationally. Maybe he wandered away from a nearby house. Maybe he didn't know how to get back. I decided I couldn't just do nothing, so I made my way downstairs, flipping on the porch light in hopes of making things less intimidating. But as I reached for the doorknob, I stopped. My instincts were screaming that something wasn't right. If he were genuinely lost, wouldn't he have rung the bell? Yelled for help? And even if fear kept him silent, Who would just hit a chair with a pipe for an hour? None of it added up. I backed away and moved toward a small side window, one that gave a view of part of the yard and the porch. I kept the lights off behind me, carefully parted the blinds, and there they were. Two adult men dressed in black, crouching beneath the porch like they were waiting for someone to open the door. I must have looked too long because one of them suddenly turned and locked eyes with me. I yanked the blinds shut and immediately called 911. As I bolted upstairs, I heard them banging on the back door, trying to break in. I locked myself in the bathroom, my chest tight with panic. I was struggling to breathe, overwhelmed with terror. Then I heard a crash, glass breaking downstairs, and the unmistakable sound of footsteps. They were inside. I heard someone creeping up the stairs, and then the bathroom doorknob began to twist, followed by a violent kick. I completely lost it, screamed that the police were on their way. Whoever was on the other side stopped, turned, and ran. Seconds later, a door slammed and silence took over. The police showed up not long after. I told them everything, but there wasn't much they could do. I didn't have security cameras or enough details to help. What did shake them was the involvement of the child. They said that kind of thing pointed to premeditation, that whoever these men were, they weren't just opportunists. That scared me more than anything. I can't stop thinking about that kid and what role he was forced to play. Every possible explanation is horrifying. The cops said it was probably just a random targeted home invasion, but to me it felt far more orchestrated. Thankfully, nothing has happened since, and I've moved on with life. But I still wonder if that child ever made it out of whatever nightmare he was caught in. It's 2024 as I write this, and with graduation just a couple of weeks away, I've been doing a lot of reflecting. I'm a senior now, and before I fully step into the next chapter, I've got to vent a little. I've never really understood how most of my friends could survive an entire spring break partying in Miami or some other wild vacation spot. Personally, I'm just not wired like that. Every year in college, I use spring break as an excuse to head home and decompress. This most recent break was no different. I was looking forward to disconnecting from everything, the school grind, the petty drama, all of it. I was especially annoyed going into the week because I had submitted what I thought was a solid regrade request for a midterm, only to have it rejected by my TA for absolutely no reason. Anyway, Monday morning rolled around, and while I didn't have anything major planned, I still wanted to get in a workout. Hitting the gym first thing in the morning is my one consistent habit. It's the only thing that makes me feel like my life isn't completely out of control. So despite having the week off and nowhere to be, I still set my alarm for 6 a.m. and pushed myself out of bed. By 6:20, I was out the door in my gym clothes, heading to the local spot about 15 minutes away. The drive takes me through quiet neighborhoods. Nothing flashy, just your typical peaceful suburb. It's the kind of place that was great to grow up in, but once high school ended and all my friends moved on, it started to feel a bit dull. I was zoning out to some background music on YouTube when I noticed something odd. An ice cream truck parked on the side of the street, completely turned off and just sitting there. Now, if it were summertime, I probably wouldn't have thought twice. But this was mid-March. The weather was still chilly and school was in session. There was absolutely no reason for an ice cream truck to be parked there at 6:30 a.m. I slowed down to get a better look, and I noticed the driver's seat was empty. When I turned the corner and drove off, I couldn't shake the weirdness of it. It wasn't just that it was the wrong season or time, it was that I couldn't remember ever seeing an ice cream truck in my neighborhood, even when I was a kid. My area just wasn't that kind of place. Still, I brushed it off and went on with my workout. After hitting the gym and grabbing a quick breakfast, I started heading home. And to my surprise, the truck was still parked in the exact same spot. That gave me pause. This is the kind of neighborhood where residents get worked up if someone parks in front of their house for too long. I remember once getting chewed out by an angry neighbor just for waiting in front of her house while picking up a friend who lived next door. So yeah, I was expecting someone to have reported the truck by now. Driven by curiosity, I looped back around to take another pass, and this time, someone was inside. As I slowly cruised by, the man behind the wheel met my gaze for a moment too long. Something about him unsettled me. He had an unusually long, pointed nose, and a patchy beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed in years. He gave off the kind of vibe you'd expect from someone who lives out of their vehicle. I didn't stick around. I headed straight home, and with both my parents at work, I had the house to myself. I spent most of the morning killing time until I stepped outside to check the mail, and that's when my stomach dropped. That same truck was now parked just a few houses down, right across the street. It wasn't facing me, but I knew it wasn't a coincidence. I stood frozen for a second, trying to process what I was seeing. There was no doubt in my mind, he had followed me home. I tried to act normal, grabbed the mail, and calmly walked back inside. Once I was upstairs, I went to one of the guest bedrooms, the one with a better view of the street. I gently pulled the curtain aside and peeked out. The truck hadn't moved. I watched for a few minutes, waiting for something to happen, though I wasn't even sure what I was expecting. Eventually, I tried to shift my focus and get some work done on my laptop, but every 30 minutes or so, I'd feel compelled to check that same window. Each time I looked, the truck was still visible, but it was never in the same exact spot. It had moved slightly up or down the street, meaning the guy was deliberately shifting positions. I debated calling the police, but I wasn't sure what I'd even report. He hadn't technically done anything. Looking back, I wish I had either called it in or just ignored it. Instead, my curiosity took over. I remembered that my older brother, a huge birdwatching nerd, kept a pair of binoculars in his room. I rummaged through his stuff until I found them, then returned to the guest room. It was during the first bloom of spring in a sleepy rural town that Mia, a college student on break, decided to go hiking alone in the forest behind her grandparents' farmhouse, an area avoided by locals and ignored by Google Maps. As she ventured deeper, she found a weathered sign half buried under vines that simply read, "Do not dig." Curious and thinking it was some forgotten relic, she ignored it and started exploring the soft, freshly thawed ground. Her boot struck something hard, an old box sealed with wax and wrapped in barbed wire. The air turned cold and the birds fell silent. That night, her grandmother woke up to the sound of dirt being dragged across the floorboards. Mia wasn't in bed. They found her at dawn, standing barefoot in the garden, her eyes pitch black, whispering the same sentence on loop. "It bloomed again, and it remembers me." No one knows what she unearthed, but every spring since, the ground around the farmhouse pulses like it's breathing. And sometimes, late at night, you can hear